All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm here with Alex Olshonsky. Alex is a writer, executive coach, somatic therapist, facilitator, addiction expert, and meditator. And I really appreciate Alex's writing on Substack. We've become friends in recent times. And yeah, really happy to have him on. So welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks, Jordan. Really stoked to be here.
Awesome, brother. So one of the impetuses for this conversation was that we both share a love for Peter Brown, or at least I have a deep love for Peter, and I know you've recently become interested in his books and been diving in. And so, yeah, I wanted to start off by asking you, just diving straight into the heart of the matter, what are you loving most about Peter's work and message, and what do you feel he's pointing at?
I would say that it's well past just interested in Peter. I'm now fully obsessed and fully converted. And yeah, it was funny to when I sort of first discovered his work and was just researching him, and then I found your article and reached out and reconnected. It was like, oh, okay, you've been drinking from that nectar for some time. And yeah, so for me, I guess the short version would be I'd been on a spiritual path for many years, and then had a big opening a few years ago when I discovered the direct, more non-dual, just relax into what is teachings, and studied Advaita, and then more recently I found a home in the Vajrayana and Dzogchen and that sort of flavor of Buddhism. And one of my teachers recommended that I check out Peter Brown. This is probably, I don't know, sometime last year, some months ago. And he was like, yeah, read everything that he's written. And so I did, and I was just immediately blown away. I mean, this guy, he's criminally underrated, I feel, as a teacher. And he's articulating something so clearly. I would love to get your thoughts on this. I mean, it feels like he's really articulating Dzogchen, but just not in the traditional lineage, trappings. And he just does it so brilliantly and simply. And I think it's what he points to just one thing over and over again, and that is experience. Experience is here. It's right now. It's instantaneous. It's insanely creative. It can't be pinned down. It can't be pinned down by the thinking mind. And if you let it take you and learn to play with it in a sort of way and let it seduce you, I think is something that he talks about. Life gets really, really interesting, and you're sort of just in this flow. And what is also, I think, so empowering about his message is he's not talking about deconstructing the self. He's not saying you need to go through any advanced sadhana or progression of meditations. You simply can just notice that it's just right here. And any state of consciousness that arises is within experience. And thus, experience is what we have. And experience is the miracle. And so there's a lot more I could say, but maybe that's a good starting point.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. Thank you. And yeah, I've heard him called a homegrown Dzogchen teacher by someone before, and so based on what I know about Dzogchen, there's a lot of resonance there. I know that Peter would say that his message was resonant with a number of traditions and kind of the inner esoteric core of many traditions, like Kashmir Shaivism. He also wrote a book about Jesus Christ's message in the Gospel of Thomas. And according to him, that message is precisely consonant with the yoga of radiant presence. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. And I think, yeah, to touch on one thing you said, I feel like I love as well that Peter's message is not about deconstructing the self. He would sometimes say, you know, you don't have to deconstruct what is false, just go to what is true, and what is true will do the heavy lifting. So just hang out with what is actual, hang out with what is undeniable and unavoidable, which is just this right here. I mean, what could be more undeniable than something is right here, right now? This is the
Yeah.
concrete presence of actuality, or as he would say, the concrete presence of infinity. And his work was just such a beautiful invitation to really just let yourself arrive at now as a finish line, not as like you got all this heavy lifting you need to do to attain some spiritual goal sometime in the future. He would repeatedly say, this is the finish line right now. This is the fullness of radiant presence. This is the fullness of reality right here and now. And just check it out whenever you want to, basically. I love his casualness.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, whenever you get the feeling, just take a sip, just drink it in, let it seduce you, sip it like a fine wine, or he would say, taste it like psychic braille, or like slipping into a hot bath. So he had all these incredible pointers for how to be with immediate experience in incredibly intimate ways. Curious what comes up for you in relation to that. Yeah.
Well, I just really felt you reminded me of that, like feel into it, like psychic braille, like in that he's so clever with these pointers to just, like feel into your immediate environment, like it's psychic braille. And I think that, yeah, the thing that really unlocked for me I mean, it wasn't like he was saying something that I hadn't necessarily like grokked on my meditative path before, but it did. Well, actually, maybe that's not true, because it did help me really appreciate the full field of experience. And to your point, like rather than like worrying about deconstructing the self, or, really paying great care to your emotions and thoughts. And he wouldn't ever advocate for bypassing, but he would also just point out that there's more going on than just the thoughts or the emotions. And there's this whole field right in front of you. And when you pay attention to that, to me, that's like a very life positive aspect, right? Where it's like, oh, look at just this amazing, intricate, wildly, HD VR set that's going on at all times. And it's truly a field, and you can't quite taste it. Or you can't quite, pin it, know it. And anytime you think that you know it, or if you think that, whatever story that you have, like, oh, I'm really tired because my baby was up, and, I had too much caffeine, right? That's not the full picture of what's happening. And he's just masterful at pointing people back to that over and over again. Is anytime you think that you have something figured out or described, like you're not seeing the full field. And that's okay, right? That's not a problem if you're in that, because it's still the field, just being a little confused. But whenever you want, you can just pay attention to this field and you can notice it. And something that you shared also reminded me of another one of his phrases, which just I love, is that you're not a failed expression of the infinite. Like you're it, right? The infinite hasn't fucked up. Can we cuss on this or no? Okay, yeah. The infinite has not fucked anything up by having you exactly how you are in this exact moment. It's perfect, right? The other one I really love is, you're like a fish made out of water in the middle of the ocean. Like, what could be more complete or safe? And that pointing, like even that in the middle of the ocean, it's pointing to the whole full field. And, of course, as we know, and we actually pay really close attention to direct experience, right? There's just sort of this space in the field, and what we tend to get confused about is identifying as like this really fixed thing, when in fact it's more just like swimming in this warm bathwater.
Yeah, beautifully said. I love how he would say that you do know reality. You know it most intimately, like you're swimming in it, and it's the only thing you've ever known. And yet, in another sense, you don't know it, because you cannot ever reach a final conclusion about what it is. You can never fully pin it down. Any belief system, even our most sophisticated maps, they're just ultimately seen to be like children's toys that just cannot grok even one instant of this. And that's this quality of unpinned down ability that is really a crucial doorway in his work. You just you stay with the unpinned down ability of the moment. You really ask yourself, why is this moment so unsayable? What is it about this moment that makes it unsayable? And that's when you start to notice the impermanence, the ever shiftingness, the morphingness, the dynamism, how everything is always this kind of ever flowing pixelation. And that's how you can start to see, like, oh, well, words make it seem like things are these fixed objects, but my actual experience, in another sense, or kind of if I just shift my lens a little bit, is just this continuous ever morphing flow. So you kind of discover the flow. And Peter would say, just stay with that flow, stay with that ever shifting radiance, and that will do the heavy lifting. You don't have to worry about like deconstructing the self or letting go of what's not true, because if you just repeatedly return to the radiance, every moment of noticing is cumulative, he would say. And those moments of noticing accumulate over time, and they accumulate toward a gradual, more and more appreciation, you could say, more and more liberation into being able to be with this as a fuller range of what it is. I love that he talked about it this way. Like you're learning to sensitively be with reality, be with experience, so that you can actually discover a fuller range of what it is, of its kind of infinite modes. It's like usually we live within this quite narrow human bandwidth, which is also totally rich and beautiful and totally it. And yet it's just, there's so much more to the story. We're not just tiny monkeys on a rock in a vast universe, trying to survive and check off the to-do list. That's a valid way this can seem to be, and you can be with it like that. And yet Peter is pointing out there's infinite other flavors of juiciness all around us, infinite other ways to be with it. And so I adore the all inclusivity of what he's pointing at. Really, like, he doesn't ultimately negate anything. Everything is affirmed. Everything is affirmed as a fully valid and beautiful expression of this. There's really, I've heard him say before, I don't see any illusions. He would say, I don't see any illusion. I just see reality expressing as whatever reality is expressing as. And, when it's lost in stories, that's great. That's one of its dominant modes. It does that all the time. And yet, for the purposes of liberation, for the purposes of, if those stories are getting heavy, we might want to investigate what's outside the stories, and just staying with what's outside the stories loosens up the stories and releases the weight of those stories. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that reminds me, I love it. He says, do whatever method by hook or crook to just notice this, and you can't go wrong, right? Because it's always just this. You're always reality, right? It's always an experience. If it was an experience, it's already perfect. And, it reminds me of, like, I've had some Dzogchen teachers who have been like, don't do psychedelics ever. It's delusion. The Rinpoche told me that you will be deluding yourself, and that will be polluting your mind and in way of the path. And where Peter would be like, there's nothing you can do to take you off the path. There's nothing that's outside of it. You want to take some drugs? Sure. Experiment, try meditating, try not meditating. Right. And there's something really liberating in that. But I do have a question for you, Jordan, because one thing that I feel like, and this could be, for some of your listeners, I know, like, in my case, I feel like Peter's work really landed and unlocked something for me, because I had already practiced a lot in this mode and had recognized consciousness, or had an opening or awakening, whatever language we want to use. I'm increasingly trying to, say opening, I think, instead of awakening, because I notice it kind of isolates some people. But yeah, I do wonder, right, for someone who's maybe like newer to this path, what he's pointing to, that, that perfection exists in everything. Like, I feel like, and you can just notice it. It does, to me, feel like a pointing that is going to hit a lot faster for maybe people who've had that recognition of consciousness. And I wonder, for folks who are just brand new to it, like, how it might land. Yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably very likely. I feel like teachers or communicators who are very direct, I feel like there's a stage of ripeness people tend to get to where they're really ripe for just very direct pointing, in the form of, this is it right now. And I can't really say ultimately who that will land for. I think it could land for total beginners. It could start opening up a lot for people who are new to this type of exploration, because really, whether we know it or not, we've all been engaged in this exploration our entire lives. You know, reality is the only thing we've ever engaged with. And we have had many moments of noticing the wondrousness and noticing the beauty. And when we were children, we were just plugged into that. Peter would sometimes say, you know, it was just pure wow at that time, just pure wow. And we all
Yeah,
still have that wow somewhere within, and we can go back to that. And I feel like his work is just an invitation to just see the wow and really just appreciate it, just dig it. And so I think that access point can be accessible to almost anyone. But then there are a lot of more like other ways that he's pointing and talking about this that probably wouldn't land for a lot of people. You know, he has a very unique style of communication, and I think that's why he's kind of flown under the radar, because his style of communication is so rarefied. It just doesn't click for a lot of people, and yet if it clicks for you, for me it's just like, yeah, one of the finest wines. Like it's just like tasting an incredibly
totally.
beautiful, delicious flavor of ice cream. Like, oh,
He's
this
so creative in, pointing this all out. But yeah, it's also like he's not providing a technique. There is instruction, and he has a whole yoga of radiant presence and sutras, and it's actually quite sophisticated once you dig into his work. But he doesn't, offer the steps and the framework, and he also doesn't offer maybe the promise that a lot of teachers talk about. I mean, he talks about liberation and realization, but he it continually reminds you that it's a done deal, right? How could it not be? You can't gain it, you can't lose it. And so I think there's also a lot of people who just, they're looking for a promise. They're looking to climb the mountaintop. And so, yeah, he's very iconoclast in his approach and teaching.
extremely iconoclastic. I was going to use that same word. Very much a trickster, and very much, yeah, has a flavor that will resonate with a certain type of person at a certain time. And even what you said earlier when you said he wouldn't encourage bypassing, it reminded me of I once heard him say, like, if something seems like a problem, just look in the other direction. Just look in the other direction and go to the positivity, go to somewhere in your experience that is outside your story. Just look at a wall or look at the sky. And you could say that's not a bypass, but he had this way of just really challenging any kind of assumption a person might have about the spiritual path. Like, oh, well, I need to let go of all my old karma, and I need to look at all this stuff, and he was just so really one to cut down any kind of carrot on a stick, any kind of carrot on a stick. He did not like progressive paths with full of stages and full of all these instructions of like, you got to ascend through all the jhanas, and now you've got to attain this next esoteric way of, penetrating the absolute and discovering this more rarefied way of consciousness. I once asked him about that type of stuff. Like, what do you think, Peter, about people who say, you need to ascend the jhanas and penetrate the absolute to realize para Brahman? And he just said, that's all hogwash. That's all hogwash. Burn it down. This is it right now. There's nothing more special than this right here. And that was, I feel, one of the most powerful moments of transmission for me when he said that to me. I just burst into sheer giddy giggles. It was like a wave of like lightness just swept through me. And I've heard other students of his also describe moments of intense transmission. I mean, that guy was emanating something. There was a sun, a very bright sunlight shining through Peter Brown, and if you're ready for it, it's incredibly liberating. Yeah.
Well, and that's actually what you provided the nuance there around what the bypassing. That's kind of what I meant, is like, I think for a lot of people on a traditional, whatever the hell that means, spiritual path, they will see some of his pointings and be like, this is bypassing, because he'll be like, oh, you have this problem. Yeah. Like, notice the whole field, notice the energy or the structure of the thought or the emotion, right? Pay more. Like, I think one really simple way to distill his teaching, and I think this is true for, deep levels of just awakening and realization, is like, the context is more important than the content. right? And that is a true thing. And so yeah, I think like if someone's new to his approach, it's like, wait, what do you mean? I actually don't have to buy into that story. But I feel like what he would probably also advocate is like you can let yourself, you don't have to pretend the thing's not there. Like feel it fully, And so there's a lot of nuance there. Um, yeah, that's interesting. He probably, if he was hearing this, would be like, it doesn't matter, bypassed or not. There's no such thing as a bypass. He'd probably say something like that.
Yeah, he might. I don't know exactly, but I did hear him say before, like I asked him about letting go. I had read David Hawkins' work and like the book Letting Go. I don't know if you've heard of Hawkins, but I asked him about, letting go of stuff, and he was like, there's nothing to let go of. There's nothing to let go of. And at the same time, I did get him to acknowledge in that conversation, he did acknowledge that there was kind of a purging process that would just happen ongoingly as he went through, unfoldment. And I think that's something that a lot of us have encountered on the path of radically opening to the energies of life is like it will push stuff out of you. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know
Uh-huh.
about, I don't know. I think you're also familiar with the medicine path. And I mean, ayahuasca is the most pronounced example of like your system being charged with high frequency energy that just literally like squeezes stuff out of you, and you just might vomit it up or sweat it out or cry it out or scream it out in some cases. But even, without ayahuasca, these types of things can fully happen when you're becoming really sensitized to energy and sensitized to life. And so yeah, that was a rare moment where I heard him acknowledge something like that. He was just so really just trying to keep the focus on what this is. That's what he was always pointing to, is just like, you know, is. Someone once asked him, like, what is the one word that most summarizes what this is? And he just said, is. It is. And, and he also, yeah, I had another thought. It slipped my mind. Is there anything more that comes up for you there in relation to any of that?
No, I think just you're right. Like it just, the more one dabbles in these modalities and this way of looking, the more sensitive you become. And, I'm part of my work is practicing somatic psychotherapy, and just, yeah, you don't need, and also doing the medicine path, like medicines are great for that, but not, you can just tune into the body, and then you'll start releasing things and noticing the way energy moves and becoming extremely sensitive to the exquisite fine details of sensations and energy. And that becomes extremely interesting and mysterious how that all unfolds. And yeah, that I think the more I live, the more just you realize this is just not in your control, right? That there's something doing it. And I think that's something Peter often pointed out as well, right? Is that the universe is doing this whole thing. And so reality is just on, right? It's, just, can you turn this off? No, you can't turn it off, right? It's happening.
And on that point, I also love, though, that Peter would use this word participation. And he would say, we are always also participating with reality. And he would say, there's no limit to the depth to which you can participate in your own experience. And I like how he used that word participation. I feel like it kind of got around the typical hangups people have around this dichotomy of like, well, is it free will or is it determinism? Because participation could be either. It's like maybe your participation is just determined, or maybe you're willing it, but he's just pointing that there is this feeling of I'm also here and I'm dancing with this and I'm participating with this. And as you said earlier, he would also, or related to something you said earlier, he would also say things like, I'm Peter Brown, a total schmo, and I'm God at the same time. Or I'm Peter Brown, a psychologically damaged individual who also happens to be the creator of the universe. And so he was also like
Yeah, yeah.
fully inclusive of our fragile human selves and the dances that they seem to dance within this universe as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one I remembered the thing I was going to say earlier, and this might be a good segue into another question for you. And what I was going to say was, in one of Peter's last talks actually when he was close to dying. God rest his soul. He died. His earthly body died a couple years ago, and one of his last sessions, I remember listening to it, and he said he basically shouted, "It's not about what you do. What you do doesn't matter. It's about what this is. What this is." And that, for many people, would seem like a really radical message. And for me, it seems like a radical message. And yet it highlights his endless insistence on find out what this is. He really, really prioritized the beingness and noticing what this is. And in that, though, while having an immense respect for Peter, this is one place where I can also personally, as a human being with my karmic makeup, I can seem to diverge from him in a way. I mean, on one hand, I also heard him at other times acknowledge on a more human level, like actions mattering in different senses. So I don't want to give the sense that he didn't ever acknowledge that at all, but he just relentlessly pointed to what this is. And yet, I think that could potentially be a shadow of his teaching, or a shadow of these types of teachings, is that they can so relentlessly point at what is and the beingness, and kind of overfixate on the full point is just what this is, that they can seem to dismiss or discount or diminish the importance of what we do in this world, which for me is totally important and totally matters. And it's an equally, I mean, Peter would also point out that all modes of being are valid. All modes of the universe are valid. And so to me, and he would point out, we all have the mystery of our karma and why we gravitate to different modes. And for me as a karmic individual, I seem to value more than Peter, or at least emphasize it more. I don't know. I don't want to speak for what he valued, but I seem to emphasize it more in my statements about life, that it does matter what we do. And, as a father, it matters how I treat my daughter. And I would like to see a world that's better for our children. And I do think honor matters as a man, and being an upright person of integrity. And so, that, I think what Peter was really just emphasizing was there's something about experience that doesn't depend on what you're doing. And if you can discover that, there's a real treasure there. There's something about experience that doesn't depend on what you do. And if you can discover that, it's very liberating. So I don't want to speak for his degree of valuing our actions, but certainly his teaching really emphasized the isness. And so I could see that as being one possible shadow of teachings like this. And so I wanted to ask you, are there any shadows or blind spots that you see within the non-dual or spiritual or Dharma community that you find important to be aware of?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I totally agree with you. And this is sort of what we were getting at a little bit with the spiritual bypassing element. Well, and it's also, I think, just like from what I know about Peter, and certainly I think you've been a student of his longer, but he raised twin daughters. He ran a successful like sound engineering company in the Bay. He taught everything for free, ran a sangha, right? So what he points to about like, hey, it doesn't really matter. And then you look at his actions in his life, right? It's like, from what I could tell, a man who's pretty caring, right? And pretty kind. And so that goes a long way. And like when I look at teachers, that's the most important thing that I look is like, how are they behaving, right? How are they behaving in the world? And what are they cracking jokes, right? Not taking themselves too seriously. And that always is like the type of teachers that I gravitate towards. Like another one is Michael Taft, right? Is like, he's the funniest guy in the room typically. And yeah, so like, are there shadows in the non-dual? Like maybe like let's separate this out for a minute, because I feel in the broader spiritual scene, I see a lot of shadow, a lot of challenges. In what I see, actually, I'll start there, because what I see there actually is a lot of people who are interested in spirituality. They're interested in new age spirituality. They're interested in psychic phenomena. They're interested in the latest, trend, whether that's unfoldment or IFS or whatever it is, that's going to finally get them to the place to make them better. And if everyone else is learning about it, oh, I want to get on that thing too. That's going to make me great. And What I see there is actually just a lot of spiritual materialism and a lot of people who could benefit from just like practicing, like just noticing, hey, actually just notice what's here. How, like, what's happening in experience? Like, can you be with experience and beyond the idea space? And so I actually think that there's a huge cohort of people who would benefit greatly from just practice, like being in experience more. And you could say practicing yoga, actually practicing yoga and shutting up, you know, then yeah, within the whole like non-dual scene, of course, like there's so much bypassing happening, and you hear conversations of like depersonalization. And I do think there should be more like psychological trigger warnings on, when you start noticing the shifts in perception, and that, this is different from our normal modus operandi of just being a separate individual. Like, bad things can happen to people who are not ready for that. For one, or it's not even not ready for it. It's just that like it needs to happen on its own in a very skillful, container with support. And so, yeah, I do see like a lot of shadow there. I mean, there's also tons of people now on YouTube teaching non-duality or pointing to non-duality. It's Some are great, and yeah, hey, I mean, I think that's excellent. I really do. I think like if you look at just this, there is a shift happening. Like there's way more of this happening in the world. Um, but then I think some folks are probably just like pointing to the sort of uh, essence nature, or the non-self nature, that without maybe some of those disclaimers or years of teaching behind them, and or even just like understanding the nuances of the psyche, and that a lot of people are out there who are consuming things have varying degrees of trauma that's really real, and it can be destabilizing for folks like that. And like without the nuance of like the essence or the direct teachings, which point to our formless, timeless nature, if you're just pointing to that and not also, I think, accounting for the relative, what, I think something like an integral or a more integral perspective, that can be problematic for folks. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Mm, that's an amazing answer. Thank you for that. I love the awareness of shadows, and thank you for saying that about Peter and pointing that out, because that's a fantastic thing to point out about just what a kind person he was. I mean, I always experienced him as incredibly generous. Like you said, he never charged for anything. He was incredibly funny, and what I've heard about him from people who hung out with him in person is that he was just the chillest, coolest, kindest cat. And so maybe in that respect, he preferred for his life to be his message about how to live an upright human life in a sense. And he preferred yoga to really focus on the isness, the beingness, and yeah. So thank you for saying that. Yeah, just so much love for Peter. And yeah, I love everything you said about shadows. I think I'm actually starting to, just very recently, I'm starting to strongly consider distancing myself from the word non-duality, just because I do see such an explosion of like you say, non-duality communicators on YouTube, who, so many of them just seem to be really heavily influenced by the Tony Parsons and Jim Newman lineage. I don't know if you're familiar with that lineage, but it's
I
another
know.
style.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was confusing Tony Parsons with Tony Packer, actually.
Ah, okay. Yeah, it's another style of very direct pointing, but it really focuses on negation. They often say things like, there's no one here, this is nothing, this is absence. So they really, really, in my experience, fixate and reify the no thingness and the emptiness. And that can be very liberating. Again, if you're like in a space where you're ripe for that type of pointing, it can really be an extremely liberating message. But I think a lot of people are actually, I'm increasingly aware that a lot of people are getting messed up by these types of messages. Like you're saying, there's a lot of depersonalization, derealization going on, people falling into nihilism and solipsism and feeling like they can't relate to their own family members anymore and they don't know if their loved ones are real. And, there's a lot of hazards of going into that space of super radical non-duality. And I feel like there's actually, I feel like I'm coming upon a recognition which is probably pretty controversial to say for a lot of people in the space of non-duality, but I feel like I'm reaching a space where I'm not even really wanting to use words like absolute anymore or like absolute truth. And I feel like this entire community and even some of these ancient lineages that repeatedly emphasize that what they're leading people toward is the absolute truth of existence. I've and then in my experience, the relative or the relational often gets just kind of naturally diminished or kind of relegated to the status of, oh yeah, well, that's relatively true, but it's not absolutely true. Wink, wink. And the
Totally.
absolute is what is absolutely true. And there can be this fixating of supposed emptiness, even though, as Peter would point out, and many teachers point out, emptiness too is empty. Emptiness itself can't be found, can't be grasped as something solid that you can get your hands on. Or you could say Peter loved the word unresolvability. He would say unresolvability too is unresolvable. And yeah, I guess I'm kind of coming into a space that's more like a bit more like the Zen tradition and like some flavors of Dzogchen or Vajrayana, where there's like I can't I can't land on either side of the supposed dichotomy of absolute and relative, and I increasingly don't see a dichotomy, and I increasingly can't land on either side of any supposed dichotomy. And there's just like for me, all modes are valid. All modes are valid. A mode of being with this as emptiness is valid, and I don't call that more absolutely true than a mode of me playing with my daughter and being a human being. I just see that as both of those are fully reality, and they're just different ways that reality can be with itself, different ways that reality can notice itself and engage with itself. And that for me is feeling more balanced. And I feel like even some of these great masters of ancient traditions, I think times were really hard back then. A lot of people were really, really suffering. And I feel like some of them had a pretty deeply ingrained bias against human life, where they would say things like, the body is just a sack of garbage to be tossed aside. And, human life is just a ball of
Totally.
suffering to be cast aside. And so it created this assumption that, you know, emptiness or something beyond or outside of this world was better or, more true, more so reality. And they even built an entire ontology around this. There's an entire ontology that says like consciousness is all there is, and consciousness is the absolute truth, or emptiness is the absolute truth, and that's actually all there is. And then I think there's not really a noticing that assumption actually got baked into the types of practices they would do. There was a hidden assumption within practices that were completely based on just only staying with experience and just seeing this immediate bubble of present experiencing as the only thing that's real. They basically developed an epistemology, a way of finding knowledge that had a hidden assumption baked into it. Similarly, in the same way that science has a hidden assumption baked into its epistemology, where it has kind of secretly baked into its ontology, there's already an assumption that material reality and what you can measure and what you can examine is the source of what is real. And so then they develop an epistemology, a way of measuring things that has this assumption already baked into it. And so, of course, the results that they find seem to prove their ontology, but they don't realize that their epistemology was already rooted in an ontology that had a hidden assumption. And I think there's a similar thing going on with a lot of the Enlightenment traditions. And this is a pretty subtle point that I haven't heard many people discuss. I heard Daniel Schmachtenberger discuss this, and that is somewhat inspiring what I'm saying here, but that's been kind of a pretty profound light bulb moment for me recently. That's actually been super freeing because I think it points toward what Peter actually said more clearly than almost anyone I've ever heard, probably more clearly than anyone I've ever heard, which is just this is all inclusive. Any way it looks is fully it. There's no mode that is more it than another mode. This is always fully this, and realization consists of just deeply knowing that this is always this. And any mode it's showing up as, whether that seems human or angelic or demonic or like an ant or like a god or like emptiness or fullness, that's all fully it. And there is no actual hierarchy or dichotomy anywhere. So that's a really subtle shadow that I'm kind of sitting with and playing with right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's well put. Particularly, I appreciate the philosophical breakdown. And for me, this is why, I mean, on my path, I've always been drawn to the more tantric like traditions, the more, left hand path and like the Vajrayana, right? And there are many modern teachers who definitely get the nuances that you're talking about. Like I mentioned Michael Taft earlier, and he has a tantra background, but he will be like very quick to point this out. And even looking like within Buddhism, like sort of like the Tibetan traditions and sort of what they're pointing towards versus like the Theravada and like up and out, transcend, enlightenment, never be reborn, right? There's very different, almost like goals and aspirations, where the more tantric approach is to notice that the world, the phenomena is the dancing emptiness. It is, and then not just to notice it, but to really like celebrate it and to lean into it. And so I've always been drawn to that approach more so that like I don't want to transcend anything, right? I want to actually just more be able to feel and notice that this is it here in this moment. And I mean, I think the what you're really saying is like the I don't want to say the most full, but it feels like a fuller understanding is that the relative is the absolute, right? There's no difference, right? And so people often like try to, really reify there's like an absolute or a place to get to, past cessation and all the jhanas and whatnot. But there's no, it's here. The relative is that absolute. How could it not be? And yeah, and so what you were talking about earlier, like being a man of honor, caring what you do, I think that that's all super important to me and the men I work with, and I think that yeah, to pretend like the human realm isn't the most important thing, and that like we really get so like relationships, like we're relational furry beings, like that is so important, and it's so important to me. And so yeah, if your spirituality, I think, is like pointing you away from the depth and richness of relationships, there's a problem in my view. Aren't
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I would walk that back. Let me walk that back. Because there's times of, where the monastic path is really beautiful, and there's a time and a place for that. So I wouldn't say a problem, but if you're like a householder, if you're someone living in the world who's not going into that sort of phase, then maybe I'll stand by that statement.
yeah, beautifully said. I love the added nuance at the end there. Um, because another thing of Peter's that I love that he would say is like freedom is being aware of the full range of modes and letting your awareness just drift freely through these modes and finding your own natural center of gravity among these various modes. And all the modes are valid. And so a mode of retreating from the world and attempting something like cessation or to be permanently snuffed out of existence as a monk, that's a valid mode. If you want to play with that, go for it. That's
Totally.
valid. And yet we need to recognize that is very unlikely to be the natural center of gravity for probably about 99.9% of people. Most people, they're called toward being in the world, and they have families and they're householders, like you say. And so what I'm in favor of is just encouraging people to really feel deeply in their hearts and know that this is it. This is it. There's no other time, no other place. This is the whole universe right here. This is the knife's edge of the whole universe just manifesting itself as our immediate, experience. And you're completely free to drift through the full range of flavors and modes and just find your flow, find your natural center of gravity moment to moment. And for most of us, that is going to be deeply relational, for sure. Relationality is so gorgeous. And I think both of us as fathers can appreciate that on an even deeper level after fatherhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious to ask you about fatherhood, actually. What's it been like so far, and what's been the biggest takeaways or lessons or shifts?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. Well, I have a 7th month old boy. And so it's been quite the ride this year. And it's really interesting because I discovered Peter like right at the start of this journey. And it felt like having the baby born and then discovering those teachings like really did something for me because it just allows you to appreciate the the fullness of just what you're doing and changing diapers and being with it. And so it's honestly it's hard to put into words because it's that big of a thing. I mean, when he was born and I helped pull him out of my partner, that was one of the more ecstatic moments I've ever experienced. And then there is like just the total blur, and so I feel like it is simultaneously harder and all of the things that people say about how challenging and difficult it is. And at the same time, it's also like easier and effortless. And I felt really natural. And like I didn't read any books on parenting. I'm a reader and writer, but I wanted to really just see what it would be like to do this on my own. And I haven't felt I'm needed to. And of course, we have family, and I have a sister who has kids. So, I'm friends and who have kids. So I absorb a lot of wisdom, but the first couple hours I didn't know how to hold them, but then after that there's something in us that knows what to do here and knows how to attune. And I'm just so grateful that I have a meditative and spiritual practice, and I had built up some momentum in that practice prior to having him, because it is truly like the ultimate practice ground, and is a lot of fun and so joyous. And so it's been incredible for me. I mean, I'll say, I guess, just two other things. One is that I've really come to appreciate that it is a different ball game, I feel, for the mothers and the fathers, and just seeing the transformation that Grace, my partner, went through, how she's the primary feeding source and soothing source. It just is it. I feel like it's a different. I have a much deeper appreciations for mothers and the divine mother, and for all of the mothers, because they're doing a lot. And I think as a new father, it's really, you're there to support her and your baby. That's how I feel, at least. And then the other thing is that, like, having the baby really settled something in me psychologically, like deep in the psyche, spiritually. I had a lot of, I think, normal-ish neuroses about having kids. Like, first, it's like, are we going to be able to get pregnant? Or, that, but then for me, and I think this is like part of my background and lineage, coming from, Holocaust survivors and having a Jewish lineage of like health neuroses, I had a lot of fear that like I would have an unhealthy kid, or like, what if they have problems, or what would that mean? And just meeting my son and seeing how perfect he is, and how, it is just really like, oh, I can trust life. I can trust the universe. And even if he wasn't, like, I think that, or even if something happens, it is just on a really deep somatic level, settled something in me where there's a lot more trust in this whole shebang, the universe, spirit, God, the way, whatever we might call it.
Beautifully said. Thank you for sharing all that. And yeah, I just want to also give such a shout out to my wife and to all the divine mothers out there. I fully agree with that it is unimaginable what motherhood really entails. And it's like the most underestimated role on the planet by people who haven't been through that or haven't seen it up close, because it is so full on. And fatherhood is full on, but motherhood is another level, like you say. And yeah, So just God bless the mothers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
And I think for me, just to toss one of my own shifts in there, my daughter's about 3.5 now, so it's been a few years, and man, I mean, we love her so dearly. She's the light of our life, little Leela. And
Mm.
for me, it's really been like my life had to do a 180 in many ways to shift into this mode. I think I didn't fully understand and expect that. Now I can see it more clearly, but I didn't quite realize that I had been living such a kind of wildly free Peter Pan vagabonding lifestyle as a digital nomad. And my entire belief system and tapestry of my worldview was just kind of a smorgasbord of different kind of ideas that I'd plucked from different new age philosophies and from different wisdom traditions. And there was a lot of gold in there, and I still integrate a lot of that. But actually I found that my tapestry of worldviews at that time was much more well suited to the lifestyle I was leading, of like free flow and kind of, yeah, let's just manifest our highest excitement at all times and kind of, live our dream life. And actually found myself needing to really reach back to my childhood, being raised Catholic, and reintegrate a lot of the operating system that was passed down to me, the more Christian value based operating system. And that's been a whole journey. At this moment, I don't feel a strong need to actually identify as Christian or Catholic, and yet I totally re-plugged back into this ancient superstructure of my ancestors and gained a whole new respect for, like, oh, they fashioned this thing as an incredibly powerful psycho-spiritual technology that is especially well suited to family life and communal life. All of these
Right.
values make so much more sense now that I'm a parent, and I need to literally, my life needs to become way more about devotion and service and self-sacrifice and humility and grounding and work ethic and relationality and heart opening and, purification, sanctification. I'm not saying it wasn't at all about those things before, but I hadn't realized I hadn't realized just how selfish I am, how selfish I was, and I'm still selfish, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. Again, that's another mode of a way the universe can be, and yet in many ways, I think the transition from boyhood to manhood is one of kind of burning away our selfishness and discovering what is sacred. In the etymological sense, the word sacred derives from an ancient word meaning sacrifice. Sacred meant what you're willing to sacrifice for. And I feel there's something super beautiful in that. And being a father clarifies that like nothing else. It's like, oh, this baby is what I will sacrifice for more than anything else. If you open your heart to that baby, you just feel like, I will give my life for you. I'll do whatever it takes. I will not fail at this. I'll make sure you have a roof over your head. There's food on your plate. I will do whatever it takes, and I would die for you if I needed to. I am your protector, and I swear that to you. It's like a warrior's
Mm-hmm.
code of a father, and it shifted me into a whole different mode of being to go through that. And really, I feel like it was required to reintegrate a lot of that ancient mighty sequoia of the ancestral Christian operating system just to stay put in the pressure cooker of family life, because I didn't realize how much my digital nomadism had been to some extent a kind of perpetual running away from just like a deep grounding in the now moment. And it turns out that was what I really needed, because that's allowed me to, you know, take, for example, Peter's yoga and, like you say, just apply it right where I am and discover that I don't need to go to the other side of the world to experience novelty. Novelty is every moment. This is
Mm-hmm.
the ever shifting freshness and artistry, and it's just right here. And but grounding down was hard, because grounding down into a family structure brought up all of my deep childhood wounds that I hadn't wanted to look at, or a whole bunch of them. It's an ongoing process, but it's been a really big healing process and really big initiation for me. So yeah, that's the piece that I wanted to share about it. Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate you mentioning that. I similarly have gone back to some of my Jewish traditions in a way that has surprised me. And I went through a whole journey with that when I was in high school and college. I like renounced Judaism and was like, I really like, I went and became a materialist and then agnostic, atheist, nihilist, existentialist. There's a whole journey there, but I think I know you're kind of like that OG, philosopher. Yeah, there's something that's like the modern man's hero's journey is to hate their birth religion, to become like an existentialist, and then have a breaking point where it's like, oh wait, I need some meaning structure actually. And so I've noticed that within me as well too. And what you just hearing what you share reminds me, I think for me the transition had been a little bit smoother. I'd been living somewhat nomadically, but I think for me being in recovery helped a lot. And I'm now 9 years into my recovery, and the foundation of that is really based on like the things you mentioned of like service, hard work ethic, like like trying to humble yourself. And I think that helped me a lot, prepare for this. And so, yeah, like I mentioned, like, I think if I didn't have sort of the meditative and spiritual practice, I could see how like parenting would be like a nightmare. Like if you're in a different place, or if you're really stressed, and if you don't have tools and practices, I could see it being like extremely challenging. Because it is challenging, and so it does force you to level up. And yeah, just on the like, even on the like the worth ethic front, like I'm just noticing how much there's a stronger desire to like really like when I am working, like, okay, like let's not be distracted. Let's get things done. Like your time is limited. And it also forces you to recalibrate your ambition, at least for me. Like I am similar to you, like, or I don't know if I don't want to speak for what your ambitions or experience have been like, but um, yeah, I had a lot that I wanted to do and was doing a lot of different things, and a big impact that I wanted to make. And I feel like I've really like come down to earth in terms of just like, oh, okay, my impact is right here. And you actually don't have time for, a tenth of those things that you wanted to do. So what are you going to do? you know? Yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And one thing that unites us, or a commonality, is that we both lead men's work. Men's work has been a big part of our lives. We both been part of the Arc of Brotherhood, and we both lead men's work. And so I wanted to ask you, for you, what has been most powerful or impactful about men's work in your life?
hmm Yeah. Men's work legitimately transformed my life at a few key junctures. The first was in my early recovery, and it was the men in 12-step groups in AA that really, just deeply changed me. These are guys who, when I didn't have anywhere to go and I was really in a down and out place, took me in, showed me what to do. And this is at a time when I really didn't know how to live, and I needed and I was finally humbled to that point where I was like, hey, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to live. I can't make it, 20 minutes without getting high. What do I do? And these guys were able to, show me the way and help me navigate divorce and debt in a really dark place that I was in. And it was like, I at first was doing, and I had to do all sorts of recovery, but like having that safe space of just being with men, like that was my first, like, oh, there's something here for me. And just like being in that supportive environment. And so that was the first moment. And then a couple of years later is when I started doing men's work, like as it's more commonly known, and joining the Arc of Brotherhood, Mankind Project, many other groups. But really, it was within the Arc of Brotherhood and my mentor, Ben Gorski's group, who I think you know, where those men basically, it was like being in that dedicated weekly group for 2 hours for some time, for some years, and like having these men be like, you're you're so gifted, and I feel you know what you want to do, and you're not living it. Go do it. And that was another turning point in my life, and ultimately led me to leave tech and to do the work that I'm doing today. And so yeah, there were like literally men's groups have transformed my life at a few key junctures. And I feel very like today I'm doing what I love. Like I have no questions about like, am I in my purpose or living my dharma? And it's just a matter of like, degrees of, noticing. And that's a really amazing place to be in, to not be worried, like, am I out of alignment? Am I not in my purpose? And I really cite men's groups as helping me get into that place. And as someone who for so many years was not in that place and really like noticing like an acute gap between like what I wanted to do, what I felt like my potential and gifts were, and what I was doing, like that really hurts. And it's a really painful place to be in, especially as a man. And I do think that there's something like within uh, the male psyche that really like wants to be in alignment. And yeah, men's groups help me get there. And once you sort of, I don't want to say solve that problem because it's an ongoing yoga pose to be figuring out your purpose and living your dharma. But like once you've come into harmony with the movement of where you're going, just things feel so much lighter and freer. And so that's something that I wish for all men. And it's not just about that too, it's not just about finding purpose. But yeah, for me, that I think has been the changing element that led me to want to to do this work and work with other men. And so, yeah, I think when it comes to men's work, it's like purpose, career, relationships, like in particular, and that could be your relationship with anyone, but for most heteronormative people, it's the relationship with the feminine and how to be in right relationship with women. And, and yeah, and I feel like of course there's more, but just those two, and that those two things are huge aspects of our life. Like, what are we doing with our career and work? What are our relationships and romance look like? And then of course, like, how are we in relationship with other men? How do other men who meet you each week receive you? And in a container like that, where you have guys who are committed to not just their own personal evolution, but to your evolution as well, there's like no better way to catch your blind spots and to see like how you're really showing up, because these men are going to tell you, when you say you're going to do something, and if you don't do it, they'll tell you. And so there's something that's just so refreshing about that. And, I have a very gentle somatic healer in me, but in a men's workspace, you get to just tell it like it is. And so I love that. I love having spaces like that. And, we used to gather around the fire after a hunt and have a space for that. But now as men, we have to create these containers on Zoom where we artificially create those scenarios. And it's super powerful to do so and fun.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I love that one of the first things you said was when you were in recovery, it was the men. It was the men themselves. It was the presence of men who cared about you. And that's something that can be easy to overlook about men's work. It's easy to, talk about all the different types of exercises and modalities and how we holistically explore, any area of life. Nothing's off limits. Any guy can share about any aspect of his experience and get reflections and such. But I just, that really landed for me and felt like the deepest truth of what has been powerful and impactful for me about men's work is just spending extended periods of time over years and years being in the presence of the type of men who would engage in men's work, the type of men who are called to grow and evolve and are on healing journeys and want to close the gap between who they know they are in their hearts and who they find themselves being day to day. It's just like, it's incredibly impactful and inspiring and activating to be in the presence of those men. These men become amazing friends. They become your brothers. They become your mentors, your sidekicks, your cheerleaders. They become surrogate father figures that help you heal the father wound, heal wounds you may have had with your father or your parents. And Yeah, I mean, I've I found so many amazing friends through men's work. I mean, a lot of the guys that are in the men's circles I lead are some of my closest friends in the world. And, some people seem to draw more of a hard line between like, oh, well, if this is my professional life and I'm the professional facilitator, I can't get too close friendship wise with people I'm facilitating for. But I, I'm aware of some of those subtleties in different contexts, but I don't feel that way in a lot of the work that I do, and especially in men's work. I feel like the actual friendship, the brotherhood, the real friendship is a huge part of the medicine, the real authentic love that's like, no, I'm not just facilitating a space as a kind of, a stereotypical professional sterilized facilitator who's just, playing some rule book out. Like, I fucking care about you guys and like I want to hang out. Like like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I want us all to
Totally.
like go camping in the woods and fucking tell stories around the fire. Like, so that's a big part of it for me. And I love that you mentioned the calling each other out on shadows and blind spots too. That's been really impactful for me. And I actually wanted to ask you, is there any story you can tell of a shadow or a blind spot of yours that men's work helped you illuminate and work with? Um, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Great question. Yeah. And also likewise, man, like some of my best friends are in the groups that I run and I've become so close to them and we do retreats twice a year. And it's like, those are the best weekends of some of the best weekends of my year. We really like let stuff move and there's crying and laughter and screaming and all the stuff. So, okay, one really impactful comment was we were doing the King's Chair exercise, which and well, where we're basically, telling someone why they are a king, why you perceive them as a king, and why you perceive them as not a king. And one of the comments was that he was like, I think you take yourself too seriously. And this is at a time when I think I was taking myself too seriously. And it was one of those things that really hurt. And it hurt to hear it at the time. And that's how it's something true, right? Because when you feel it and there's some resistance to it, it's like, ooh, yeah, you're right. That there's something that I've just been holding too tightly about this whole shebang. And I think it really helped me lighten up just hearing that and to have someone like, where else do you get, like in life, you could have someone tell you that. I mean, the only scenario, yeah, if you have very conscious, direct friends, you might get that feedback from them. But more often, you're going to get that in a fight in like a malicious way to hear something like, you take yourself way too seriously, dude, right? That's at least how I imagine it coming. But to have a container in which it came from a guy who I respected, who was telling it, because he thought I needed to hear it. Yeah, it really landed for me. And that is a perpetual, I think, dance. And part of the yoga is to like, that this, in a certain sense, none of it matters. And it's in the other sense, everything matters so immensely and it's divine. But yeah, for me, I think having to just always try to hold everything lightly and to have fun and to play, that's one of my big values and intentions again for this year. So it's something that I really am still working with.
Beautiful, man. That's a great example. And one for myself that I thought to mention, felt inspired to mention, just happened today actually. I led a men's circle pretty much right before this call. And we're working with a pretty interesting theme this month. We're actually working with the gangster archetype. So pretty,
Nice, nice.
I like working with unorthodox archetypes for shadow work purposes, because the gangster, there's so much of like, there's so much like dark masculine power, but also like really strong qualities of a mature masculine that are embodied in a really advanced gangster. And something that came up for me was kind of, we were contemplating how, somebody who's like a crime boss is incredible at organization and structure and strategy and is always like 5 steps ahead, really like tuned in, tapped in with the kind of seeing life as a chess game. Not that that's always an optimal way to be, but being able to kind of be really tuned in with society and opportunities and know how to position himself and his organization to leverage what is available and kind of applying this rationality and this logic to organization and to structure, and just exploring that actually helped me see more clearly just today that I've had this deep kind of need to be seen that partially fuels my artistry. You know, I've been an artist for a long time and a performer, and I'm really frequently putting myself out there, really embodying the kind of artist and trickster and performer. And I don't want to be strategic, and I'm just like, I'm just going to be wildly free and just spontaneously emanate forth whatever's coming through. And I just want to be seen in my full wild freedom, almost like in my Shakti. My feminine is very, very active in
Uh-huh.
my
Uh-huh.
expression. You know, I just want to flow. I just want to be seen in my dancing radiance kind of thing. But actually contemplating the gangster unexpectedly has helped me see that approaching business as an artist and a trickster and a performer has actually placed certain limitations on my capacity to reach real goals that I have with my business, for my capacity to, you know, build greater wealth and provide for my family and my daughter and build a legacy that parts of me genuinely want to build. And so it feels actually pretty big to acknowledge that, and for the shadow work of looking at the gangster to show me, oh, actually I think it's okay for me to reactivate more of my left brain, which I kind of turned off years ago and demonized when I saw its failure
Right.
modes really clearly. When I saw its failure modes really clearly, the pendulum swung heavily toward a right-brained way of living, which often happens, right? When we see the failure modes, like you said, with
Right.
religion
Right.
as a child, you saw the failure mode, so you swung to atheism or existentialism. And I did the same thing. But over time, the pendulum has to rebalance itself. And so I'm starting to see, oh, I can reintegrate a lot of left brain strategy and logic and rationality and organization and structure. And that's probably going to help me level up a lot as an entrepreneur and as a man, a creator and a man in business. And I don't need to be seen all the time. You know, the gangster is fine being in the shadows and moving in silence, doesn't need anybody to really know what he's doing. He's just taking care of business. And there's something there actually that I can learn from. I can a quality I can more fully embody. So yeah, I thought that was a kind of a cool example. It just happened today that's really sparked something for me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I would have never thought of working with the gangster, and it also, your description is different than how I would have maybe anticipated it. I think the first thing that came to mind when I hear gangster, I'm thinking of like almost like Jay-Z or hip hop artist. But then it sounds like, yeah, there's like a Tony Soprano kind of gangster, yeah, like behind the scenes of the mob that you're talking about. And that is a fun one to work with. I remember just a couple like months ago, there was an article that went viral about how like the Gen Z mind can't understand the attractiveness of Tony Soprano. And it got a lot of energy and excitement because like there's something where a lot of these women were saying that like, yeah, like Tony Soprano is sexy in his own way, right? And so yeah, there's a lot there. That's cool. So for you, yeah, and I also wouldn't have expected that working with the gangster archetype would have you focusing on more organization structure.
Right, super surprising. And yeah, that's the delightful thing about men's work and about archetypal work, is that it can go in unexpected directions. But what was crazy was that a lot of the Americans in the group, myself included, initially focused more on the kind of street hustler in New York City hip hop artist who's just like moving weight and doing whatever it takes to like make it to the top. And that warrior energy is also really powerful to tap into through the gangster lens. But the European guys in the group were like, oh, that's not where my mind goes. I go to the Italian mafioso, and I go to, you know, the crime boss in the shadows who's like the master chess player. And that really, yeah, it was totally unexpected, but it really opened something up for me as we started exploring that. So we did a cool exercise in both the circles I lead where we had a dialogue about the superpowers of the gangster And we had this dialogue while attempting to embody our inner gangster. So we pretended to be gangsters having a dialogue about the superpowers of the gangster.
Yeah.
So we could like activate those energies while talking about what is powerful about them. And that, yeah, that turned out to be pretty fruitful in both groups. So, yeah.
I might have to borrow that one from you because I definitely have. I mean, growing up on the East Coast and Mid Atlantic, and we were obsessed with Notorious B.I.G. and smoking blunts, and yeah, I used to sell weed, and so I definitely had this bad boy streak in me, like wanting to be a gangster, and I DJ'd, and yeah, and so there was something. We can make meaning of it now where it was like modern living was so bereft of meaning that I was like trying to forge my own meaning. And that was through sort of, small crime and being a badass and non-conforming and, these maybe, in these places, because that was a cool thing to do. And so, yeah, there's a lot there. I'm going to have to maybe adopt that.
Yeah, go for it, brother. Yeah, man, I can't. I'm struck by how parallel our paths are. It's like you're me in another disguise. Because yeah, I also was selling weed back in the day, and like so many things that you say just
Yeah,
are
we
like,
have a lot of similarities. Like I feel like, we both, lead ayahuasca work, right? And that's part of my path. But I think in more recent years have been about like the bare bones non-duality, right? I feel like we share that similarity. You're more of a OG, I feel like online creator. I feel like I've been seeing your stuff forever. And where I've been, I feel like more of just like a pure writer. But I'm trying to, I would love to get into more of the media. I would love to make YouTubes. That's another question for how I can make time for it all with the newborn and whatnot. But yeah, a lot of similarity, man. Feel that.
yeah, yeah, it's amazing. It's really cool to resonate and the one last thing about the gangster is just that men pointed out today that Donald Trump heavily embodies the gangster archetype in a certain respect, and that
Totally.
there's something there that is speaking to the collective masculine psyche. There's something about a man who can have hundreds of millions of people hate him globally and just basically seem to not give a fuck, and he's just like, oh, you know what? I'm hustling. I got my mission, like, and I'm laser focused, and I don't give a fuck what you say to me. And
That's a
yeah,
really good insight. Totally. There is something that's going on with that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the gangster may
And the
be a
gangster doesn't
timely.
apologize, right?
Mm,
Like I feel like the gangster never apologizes, and I'm not endorsing that, but I do think there's something. It's a pendulum swing, right? Where because you have this like super hypersensitive men who wanted to apologize for everything, for even existing, and that pendulum is swung to the other side now, right?
mm.
Culturally,
Yeah, yeah. Totally something unapologetic about the gangster, and even then, perhaps the truly integrated, heart-centered gangster does learn how to apologize. Maybe the inability to apologize could be one of the shadow expressions of the gangster, which again, like you say, there may be a lot to learn from the shadow expressions, but then generally the aim, at least in the way I lead men's work, and I'm guessing this resonates with you, is yeah, trying to bring all these shadows into the kind of the furnace of the heart, the loving, the fires of loving presence, and alchemize all of it so that all of these shadows can kind of set down their burdens and return to their original luminous templates in alignment with the whole, and we can actually direct those energies toward our north stars and towards the highest good of the whole, which is very, very deep work to do, to turn these, what many people would see in them, so would reject in themselves and see as like monsters or monstrous parts, to turn those monsters into allies that can actually become aligned with a heart-centered mission. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think the most important thing for me with the archetype work and for the shadows is just like the ownership that it's there, and not denying it. Like that horizontal dimension, I feel like of relationality is really important. And that's where when you get in a men's group and you hear everyone else, oh yeah, like I think about that too sometimes. Like, or I have that in me too. It's really just, it can be really liberating and healing just to know, oh, okay, you're not crazy. You're not morally wrong, right? These are unconscious energies that swim in all of us, and first step is just acknowledging it. Then that makes space for that it to just be there and integrate, and for whatever fuller expression wants to come through you can do so without it being dragged down unconsciously by those forces and those energies. And so, I love how you keep bringing it back to the heart. I think that, for me, that's the two elements. Like when I lead my group, the Sons of Now, the two. I mean, there's so many values, right? And we've got a whole sort of mission around different values and in words, but the two I think could be boiled down to love and fire. And fire is like that fierce challenge, and love is of course just like the heart and the awakened heart that holds this all, and that can know that we're interconnected, to know that we're supporting each other, to know that we have that we are made of love and of love, by love, for love, inseparable from it,
Beautifully said, my friend. Yeah, when I look honestly within myself, I find every potentiality that seems to be within humanity. I find the potentiality for the full spectrum of human behavior. So I like what you said about just that ownership and how just being honest in these spaces and realizing that we do have all these potentialities within us, and that these energies, and that is not wrong. That's okay. That's life being life too. Can be incredibly healing to be able to acknowledge that and hold that in loving presence, in a collectively held field of loving presence. So yeah, beautifully said. And as we draw to a close here, I feel like what you just said about love would have been a wonderful answer to this question. So maybe you'll say something similar, but I wanted to ask if you had a chance to share a message with the whole world right now, what would that message be?
Hmm. Is this like the Tim Ferriss, what you put on a billboard, or do you have more room to go a little longer?
You have room to go longer. Yeah.
Okay. I think it would be something to the tune of, well, let's keep it in Peter Brown terms, which is one, to be with your direct experience, right? And to actually come back into the body, notice what it's like to feel and sense, and to be in just this vivid, wondrous display. The second would be to question beliefs and assumptions. And I think this one's so important today. And I think that if more people could really internalize the message that you're not what you think you are, and any belief is open to interpretation. All beliefs and there's partial truth everywhere, but there's so much fueled, I think, in our online world that calcifies a sense of identity and righteousness within people, that I think really is worth looking at, and that you're not what you think you are. And we really should hold on to those labels and stories about other people, about the way the world works, about events in faraway places. Like, people should really hold those lightly and investigate and come back into their direct experience. And then I think thirdly is just to be good company, to be a good neighbor, to be kind, and to, have fun along this way. And so, I think I'm paraphrasing, but I think there's something like I remember reading from Peter where he talks about be with immediate experience, don't buy into the stories, and be good company. And I think that's a pretty good framework and a pretty good philosophy that I would want to share for now.
Gorgeous, my friend. Thank you. That was amazing. And where can people find your work, and any last things you want to add?
Sure. Yeah. My website is just my name, alexolshonsky.com. You can find everything there. I write a Substack newsletter and host a podcast, and that's called Deep Fix. You can find the link on my website. And I run a men's group, Sons of Now. And I work as a coach and somatic therapist, and also do work in the addiction and psychedelic space. I'm the co-founder of Natura Care, which is a program that works with individuals facing addiction and takes them on retreats in the jungle and teaches contemplative practice and works with ayahuasca as our primary sacrament. So I do a few different things, and if folks are interested in checking that out, I love connecting with more like-minded people. And I think that's it. This has been really fun. I love that we have so much similarities in our path, man. And I just love getting to jam with you on, on these topics that, like I was telling you like earlier, which is, usually people they want to hear the addiction story, and which is a good one and fun to talk about, but it's nice just to get to jump right into spiritual life and what's alive for us on that front.
Dude, yeah, 100%. This has been really fun. It's been a joy. Thank you so much. Just, yeah, honoring you. Thank you. Thank you for your presence today. It's been
Thank you,
beautiful.
Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for leading and putting yourself out there so creatively and expressively. You really inspire me in that regard, man.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. Thank you, my friend.